I'm Karen McManus, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thorpe,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Karen McManus.
It's episode 234 of the Author Stories Podcast.
I would like to tell you about some sponsors. You know that all of this great content that you're getting is brought to you because we have such great sponsors who help offset the cost to bring a show like this to you every day. And if you would like to sponsor the show, go to hankgarner.com. There's a link in that top menu where you can click there and find out how you can sponsor the show. I'd like to thank Daniel Arthur Smith, the curator and publisher of Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. The Halloween special is out, and it is phenomenal. This is my favorite monthly publication. I think you're going to love it. Go pick up a copy of Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Also, from my friend Bob Williams comes Music City Macabre and Arch City Apocalypse, his post-apocalyptic take on the city of Nashville. He has recently re-released these books. They are phenomenal. New art, new editing. They're tremendous books. He's also combined them into one volume called Blood and Chaos, and that gets you Music City Macabre and Arch City Apocalypse together from Bob Williams. There's a link in the show notes. Go pick up these books. Authors, you need to have a website. It's non-negotiable. Now, you have to have a way for people to connect with you. And also, readers, if you like to connect with your favorite authors, ThirdScribe is the place to do that. Author websites, community to link readers and writers together. Go visit ThirdScribe.com. It's newly redesigned and easier than ever to use. ThirdScribe.com. Also, Retrograde from Peter Codron. The international team at the Mars Endeavour colony is prepared for every eventuality except one. What happens when disaster strikes Earth? This book is so much fun. Everybody has been raving about it. You need to go pick up a copy of Retrograde by Peter Codron. Also, this weekend, Peter has a bunch, I think 20 some odd, of his earlier works free to help celebrate his birthday. Happy birthday, Peter. And click on the link in the show notes to go pick up Retrograde and pick up his other books for free. Also, the Paragons Trilogy by C. Stephen Manley. When dark portals open, heroes will awaken. If you are looking for some sci-fi mixed with urban fantasy mixed with craziness, go pick up the Paragons Trilogy. The first book is called Awakened, and I think you're going to love it. C. Stephen Manley, this is a name you need to watch for. Also, thanks to my good friends Josh Hayes, Scott Moon, and Ralph Kern at Keystroke Medium. If you're interested in the craft of writing, and I know you are because you're listening to Author Stories, go give Keystroke Medium a watch over at YouTube. There's a link to it in the show notes. As always, we have an audiobook clip at the end of the show from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series, and Richard and I are recording our annual Halloween special coming up very soon, and I think you're going to love it. Thank you for listening to Author Stories. Subscribe at hankgarner.com. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to bring you an interview with Karen McManus, and Karen is the author of her debut book, One of Us is Lying. I've been reading this book, and let me tell you, it is it's crazy. Crazy in a good way. I'm loving it. It's been said that it's kind of a mix between Pretty Little Liars meets The Breakfast Club, and I think that is apt. This is an awesome book. So I'm really excited to talk to you today, Karen. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Yeah, so for me, it was in second grade. I had this wonderful teacher who had us all write stories one day in class. You know, we actually made physical books out of paper, and we were supposed to illustrate them and tell a story. And I had the greatest time with that, and I was nowhere near done by the time we were supposed to be done. And my teacher, being wonderful, recognized that this was something I really loved to do. And she kept encouraging me all year, to write more and do more. And so I did. I wrote this entire series about a witch who couldn't cast spells. That was, my concept. And then I wrote lots of other things and just kind of kept doing that all through grade school, and always thought that I would be an author. That was what I would tell people. But as I got older and I was in high school and even into college, when I tried to write longer, more complicated stories, I sort of faltered. So I put that aside for quite a while.
Wow. You said this began around second grade?
Yeah, so I was just about, 7, 8 years old?
7, 8,
yeah.
Something. Yeah, that's so cool. There are a couple of common threads that run through interviews that have been on the show. One is that a lot of writers kind of felt like they had this gift from when they were small, and it just kind of was always there. And another common thread is that there was someone that came along that recognized this gift and kind of prodded and, gave encouragement and things like that. So you having that second grade teacher that recognized that is amazing.
Yes, it was. It was really special at the time. And, it was something I considered a gift that has stayed with me all this time, that somebody saw a spark, and helped me cultivate it.
Yeah, for sure. When she gave you the idea to write this book, were you a reader already at that point?
I was a huge reader. I started reading really early. I think I was 4, and I was voracious. I was always reading well above my grade level as a kid. So even though, I didn't really know how to write as a child, there's sort of all that, knowledge that you absorb from reading that came out when I tried.
What sorts of things did you like to read?
Oh gosh, everything. I loved the Narnia books when I was a kid. Those were my favorites. I loved Little Women. I loved it. Anything, sort of fantasy was my big thing when I was a kid. Anything with myths, especially Greek mythology, anything with dragons, which I'm not a fantasy writer now. So I moved away from that. But as a kid, I loved getting lost in make-believe worlds.
But I've interviewed so many writers who write things that you would think have no connection to Lewis and Tolkien and that whole vein of fantasy, and yet so many of us started there. I wonder what it is about those kinds of stories that have such an impact on us, and even if we don't go on to write in that vein, they still kind of inform us as people and us especially as artists.
They do. There's something about the worlds, I think, that are so complete and so well done. And you really do feel like you visited someplace new while you're reading that. I know that always stayed with me with my favorite books. Like I had truly been where the author intended me to go.
Sure. So as you got a little older, at what point did you kind of give up on the notion of being a writer, and other, growing up pursuits took over?
I think it was really when I was in college. And I was an English major, so I was still reading and loving that. But as I wrote, I just couldn't finish a book. I kept writing myself into corners. It would just sort of peter off, and I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And at the time, I thought, well, maybe I just don't have what it takes, and I should do something more practical and, get a real job sort of thing. So I did that, and I did that really for quite a while, and, got married, had a child, did all those great things. But it was always sort of in the back of my mind that, I wonder if I could, or maybe I should try again. And I think what held me back at the time was I really didn't have a writing community back then. I didn't know anybody else who wrote. When things got hard, there was nobody to tell me, oh, you know what? That's okay. It's writing is hard, and maybe you should try this, or, just get it out and you can fix it later. So I don't think I understood that writing doesn't have to come easy.
Right.
That you could just kind of keep writing through the hard parts. And it really wasn't until a few years ago I joined social media and I met other writers and I started exchanging work that there was sort of this light bulb moment where I was able to push through.
That is so true. Just the very act of sharing with someone that this is hard, and it's hard for everybody. If writing comes easy, you might not be doing it right. I don't like to speak in absolutes in that way, but it's hard work, and everybody has imposter syndrome. I don't know how many people I've talked to that have 10 books on the New York Times Bestseller list, and they're like, I just don't want anybody to find out that I don't really know what I'm doing.
Exactly. I was telling someone the other day that I think even published writers who've had some degree of success still feel like we're crashing a party that everybody else was invited to.
Yes, absolutely. So did you change your major in college? Did you switch from English?
Nope, I didn't. I graduated in English major, and I got a job in communications. I did later get a graduate degree in journalism, which I have never used professionally. At the time, I was thinking of making a career change, and I ended up not doing that. But I find both degrees have been really helpful with writing. Certainly, as an English major, you've got that emphasis on reading and critical thinking and lots of writing, which is wonderful. And in journalism, there's that emphasis on storytelling and on asking the right kind of questions and story structure. Even though it's a different kind of story that you're telling, it still hones a lot of skills that I find useful now. But I found that I'm actually not very interested in writing news stories. So.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Was when you mentioned that you got a degree in journalism, you wouldn't first think that would be helpful, but I would think, and I'm just guessing here, but I would think as a journalist you would really want to train yourself to look for the details, because those are the things that make a news story stand out. Is what's the thing that the average observer didn't pick up on. And as a novelist, I would think that would be a great skill to learn, to look for the details that are really going to make this story stand out.
Absolutely. And especially because One of Us is Lying is a mystery.
Right.
And I hadn't written a mystery before this one. And it was very helpful to anticipate the questions that people would ask and kind of bring that problem-solving mindset to it, to try and plug in those plot holes that could be glaring as the mystery unfolds if you're not very carefully constructing it as you go along.
Yeah. You said that joining social media was a great catalyst to get you started writing again. Had you had the idea before then, or was this just kind of getting involved in the community lit that fire in you?
Yeah, I actually had started writing again before that. So about a year before, and this was back when The Hunger Games first came out as a movie and was pretty popular. And I had read the book, and it just stuck with me in a way that other books hadn't. And something about that young adult voice really spoke to me. And that is actually what inspired me to try writing again. And so I wrote this really terrible dystopian knockoff of The Hunger Games. I thought it was great. So I finished it, which really was an accomplishment. I hadn't finished a book in a long time. And then I thought, well, what will I do with this masterpiece that I have created? So I started, Googling different resources about getting published, and that led me to Twitter. And I started connecting with other writers, and I really quickly realized this was not a book that should ever see the light of day. So moving on, I started working on another one, but that was kind of the impetus. I kind of started the faucet turned on again,
right.
But know what to do with the creativity that was flowing. And meeting other writers really helped me figure out a direction and understand the industry. It was a steep learning curve, just even understanding, well, how do you get an agent and how do you get published? And writing as a craft was not actually something I had studied. I didn't take an MFA. I didn't even take writing classes. So there were all sorts of things about story structure and character arcs and pacing that I didn't understand, that I had to learn by doing.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that only comes through doing. You can read, and that's how you that's how you learn kind of what storytelling is. But until you sit down and actually do it, that's where the honing of the skills comes from. You have to have both. You have to read and write, and only one won't make you the other.
Right. Exactly. And just reading in the genre I had chosen, reading lots of young adult. I did that over a period of that year as I was writing a second book, which was better than the first, but still not quite good enough. And then I got the idea for One of Us is Lying. And I'm really glad that wasn't my first idea, because I don't think I could have done it justice as a first book.
Right. You talked a minute ago about that young adult voice, and something about it just really resonated with you. I spoke with someone a week or two ago, and they talked about discovering kind of a few years ago when young adult was really just kind of on fire, and they, books just seemed to be instant blockbusters, and that she said that she read Twilight and Hunger Games and a couple of those, and at first she was just like, I don't get this at all. These books are terrible. But until she put herself in the position of that protagonist and got inside that young adult mind, that then the voice really resonated with her. Did you have any trouble with that at all?
I didn't. To me, and maybe this is a reflection of being an overgrown teenager in some ways, but
me too. Don't feel bad.
I felt something about the rawness and the emotional transparency and the immediacy of the young adult voice really, really spoke to me. And I think that's why I like writing it too, because I feel like at that point in life is so pivotal, and it's so full of possibility. And there's so many different ways that a life can go based on decisions that are made at, still this relatively young age, that it just seems there's sort of this endless supply of things to think about and stories to tell.
Yeah. If you said that you were a big fan of fantasy type things when you were younger, and then when you first started writing, you dipped your toe into dystopian. What made you land at kind of a modern YA mystery as the thing that really was the thing you were supposed to write?
Yeah, it's funny because as I started exchanging work, I kept getting consistent feedback. And my first story was a fantasy. My second story was a fantasy. And I kept getting feedback that your characters are great. I love their dialogue. They sound like modern teenagers. They don't sound like they live in a future society. They don't sound like they're in the past. They sound very modern. And I thought, well, but they're not. They're in this world that I created. But I started reading contemporary much more heavily than I had been. And in particular, there were a couple books I read. One of them was Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli, who's just a wonderful writer and has amazing voice. And I thought, oh, yes, okay, that is how I'm supposed to be writing. That those are my characters. You're right. That's my voice. So I decided I would try contemporary with my next book, and almost at the same time, I got the idea for One of Us is Lying as I was driving. I was actually listening to the theme song from The Breakfast Club, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do something updated, but with a twist, like The Breakfast Club with murder. And so that kind of took off, and I was immediately very comfortable writing contemporary, and I realized that was where I should have been all along.
Yeah. Did it feel like slipping into a pair of comfortable shoes?
Completely. And it was so easy to write. I mean, not easy, but, as we've talked about, it's never easy, but it flowed. It really flowed very quickly. It only took me 2 months to draft. I certainly spent more time revising it after that, but the story just kind of tumbled out and it felt right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And we definitely don't need to confuse, hard with, with unenjoyable or with, because just because it's hard doesn't mean that you don't know this is absolutely what I'm supposed to be doing. And sometimes the joy comes out of the hard work.
Absolutely. I told some of my critique partners, I sort of felt like this orchestra conductor at times where there were all these moving parts all over the book, but I knew where they were all supposed to go and I knew how they were supposed to come together. And that's sort of the magical thing about writing, I think, is that there are so many ways it could go wrong, if you go off the tracks, but when it doesn't and when it all comes together, there's a certain alchemy that's hard to explain.
Yeah, for sure. Had you been a big reader of mysteries?
Yes, when I was younger, I loved Agatha Christie. That was my favorite. Agatha Christie books were all over my grandmother's house when I was a kid, and I think And Then There Were None is the first one I ever read, and that just blew me away. And there's actually a little bit of inspiration for One of Us is Lying came from that and from Murder on the Orient Express. And just that whole notion of like closed door mysteries, I really enjoy.
Yeah, and I can tell that in your writing that you're a fan of those because it really the tension and the what's the word I'm looking for? A great mystery makes you care about all of the characters in a way that you want to know who did it, but you don't want it to be any of them because you care about them all, and the characterization is so important in those kind of stories and something Agatha Christie was brilliant at.
Oh, especially with And Then There Were None. You've essentially got this island full of criminals, and yet you've got sympathy and empathy, and you're concerned about them. So it was masterful.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said it took you about 2 months to draft this book. When you got started, did the story just flow and it's like the faucet just turned on?
Yeah, it really did. I think there was one weekend where I wrote something like 12,000 words, which is a lot, for me and just a lot in general. And, I work full time and I have a child. So I would do this from, 9 o'clock at night till whenever. And a lot of times I would go to bed at 1 or 2 because the story was just flowing so well. I didn't want to stop. And then I'd wake up, at 3 in the morning and I'd be like, oh, I got to get this down. And I'd write for an hour. And, it really did just kind of come out, in a really great way. And then, you have to go back and fix the holes and the character arcs that aren't quite right and things like that. But it was, I think, remarkably complete for a first draft when I was done with it.
That's great. What was your family's reaction to you taking up this new hobby that was kind of taking over your nights?
Yeah, sort of, support, but also confusion.
Right.
Like, why are you doing this? Is this really going to go anywhere? Okay, that's great. Good for you. But mostly support. And I think once people started reading the book and realizing that how much of myself I think I poured into it, they started getting excited too.
That's great. So when the 2 months was up and you had finished this initial manuscript, what did you do with it?
I sent it off to my critique partners, and took a little break while they read, and they gave me feedback, and then I revised, and I probably went through, I think, 2 rounds of revision. Also reached out to different subject matter experts because I had, legal aspects and medical aspects that I wanted to make sure I got right. And that took another couple months, I would say, until I felt like I had a really solid draft. And then it was time to start querying, and that whole process of trying to get an agent. And because this is the third book I had written, I was familiar at that point with, how the process worked, and I knew which agents I was hoping to work with. And I started with my very top agent, who happened to be the agent for the author of The Hunger Games. So
Oh, wow.
full circle. I thought, well, I'm just going to start at the top. And she is now my agent. So it all worked out.
How cool. When had you spoken to that particular agent before?
No, I had not. I just queried her, cold through her website, which is, how you do it. And she's the type of agent who only wanted a letter. She doesn't ask for sample chapters. So I just sent a few paragraphs, and she requested the full manuscript within, I think, an hour. So I thought, okay, that's unusual.
Yeah.
That certainly had not happened with my other two books. And she offered representation, I think, maybe 10 days after that. So it was really fast once I got the book out there.
How intimidating is it for them to ask for just a letter? And you're like, no, you don't understand. I've written this whole book and it's brilliant.
Right.
I want you to read that, not what I have to say about it.
Yeah, especially, if you've sort of slaved over this first chapter, right? Because that's your intro, that's everything, that's your voice and your characters and all these things that you love. And nope, none of that. Just tell me what it's about.
Oh man. So a couple of weeks go by, and she offers representation. I can only imagine that you're bouncing off the walls at that point.
Yeah, that was a thrill. I was so excited. Not only had I been querying other books for, at that point, it was just about a year, but this was the agent I had hoped to work with, above all agents, that just because her client inspired me so much, and because she really tended to represent the kind of books that I wrote and that I hope to write in the future. And it felt like such a good fit. So I was thrilled. And I knew that, when we spoke, she had a vision for the book. She really fully understood it. And she knew exactly what to do with it.
Yeah. So did she offer any critiques or anything on the manuscript before you started shopping it? Or did you guys just start sending it out right away?
Yeah, we did make some changes. We made some revisions, but they weren't. They didn't take a very long time. So I think we got the manuscript out, within a month or so of me signing, and then that was a pretty quick process. I think we had an offer within a couple of weeks of going on submission. And again, like, this is very fast. It's very different from what I had experienced with previous books. Not that they'd gone on submission, but just, there tends to be more of a waiting period with just about everything. So I was really fortunate with the process for this one.
Sure. So you talked about riding in the car, and the theme song for the Breakfast Club kind of ignited this train of thought. How long did it take for the story to really take shape in your mind?
It didn't take that long. The thing that sprung, the way the process kind of went was, first I thought, okay, Breakfast Club with murder. What does that mean? Somebody dies in a classroom. Okay, how? How could you kill someone in a classroom and nobody would know it? So I spent some time thinking about that, and I came up with a way. And then I thought, okay, but why? Why would you do that? And then I came up with the concept behind One of Us is Lying, which is that the creator of the school's notorious gossip app has life-changing secrets that he is about to spill on the other 4 students in the classroom with him. And so when he dies mysteriously and investigators learn that wasn't an accident, those 4 students become suspects instead of witnesses. So when I had that core concept in mind, then I started thinking about who these people were. Who are these 4? Why are they in that classroom? What are they hiding? And that was the really interesting and fun part of the book, was coming up with these people and their whole, complicated stories and their personalities, and where they start at the beginning of the book versus where they end up.
Gotcha. What about the characters? Did they kind of come fully formed with you, or how did you go about kind of creating these kind of modern YA archetypal characters.
Yeah, the concept behind them was, again, sort of riffing off the Breakfast Club, that they all represented certain stereotypes that were brought together. So there was a princess, there was a jock, there was a criminal, and there was a brain. So they started with those very broad labels. And then, of course, there was the outsider, who is the creator of the gossip app. And he's the one who does not make it out of detention. The other four are remaining. So I spent some time creating character sheets, worksheets, where I would just sort of write down everything I could think about related to these characters in terms of their family lives and what they looked like and what they liked and who their friends were and what their hobbies were. And I created playlists for each of them, with different moods that I was trying to evoke for their state of mind and the kind of things that they cared about or were hiding. And they just started to feel like real people to me. I have to say, I felt like I had them living in my head for those 2 months, and it was like, hanging out with friends. And I missed them when I was done. You sort of feel bereft when you're done with that story. And interestingly, that's what I keep hearing from readers, who really connect with the characters, is that they feel sad when the book is over. And, are you going to write another book? I want a sequel. I want more. And that is probably the most gratifying thing, is that they do feel real to people.
Yeah, and if you've ever read a book and feel bereft at the end of it because you've become friends with these characters, writing those characters is even worse.
Yes, it is. It is. You don't know what to do with yourself when they're gone. I still occasionally think of scenes in my head that, they would do. So
Right. That we're recording this the first week of October, and as of the end of last week, one of us is has been on the New York Times Bestseller list for 14 weeks in a row. That is amazing. Congratulations, first off. It's been a tremendous summer for you and for the book, for sure. When the book, and I think there's even some talk about a TV adaptation, but when the book first came out, did your agent or your publisher have any idea that this book was going to kind of take on a life of its own?
I think not to this degree.
Yeah.
We all believed in the book, and I think we all hoped for the best, but you just never know how a book is going to be received. And when my book launched, it was the end of May, and it had really nice word of mouth, and I was getting some great reviews, but I didn't hit the bestseller list right away. And often for a debut, that's your best chance of doing that, because it takes into account all the pre-orders that have happened before your launch. And I didn't hit the second week or the third week, and I thought, okay, well, it's people are really liking it, and that's great, but this is probably not a thing that's going to happen. And then the fourth week it did. So I was really shocked and thrilled at that. And I've honestly been shocked and thrilled every week when it stays there, that it continues to get the kind of reception it has.
Well, it's always great when a book gets a lot of pre-release hype, and it debuts really well, and and has a few really great weeks that have built on all of the buzz. I hate to use the word hype, but a lot of excitement about it ahead of time. But it's a whole other thing when the book has this groundswell of word of mouth attention, because that's really when you know that this book is succeeding because people like it and they're telling other people about the book, not just because we had a great marketing machine in place ahead of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's been the greatest part for me, is how people are just going to bat for this book. Readers who love this book, they tell other people about it. Booksellers have been really supportive, both here in the U.S. and also in the U.K., where it launched at the same time, there's been a lot of support and excitement and, recommending the book or featuring it in their book clubs. And so that's been wonderful because it's very organic when that happens. It's the kind of thing that you can't really predict, but it builds on itself.
Yeah. We mentioned just a minute ago that there's some news about a TV adaptation. is working on developing One of Us is Lying into a series. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That was announced last month that it has been put into development by the E! Network. So we are in the process of, trying to develop a script and then a pilot, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, that's got to be a phenomenal feeling. Are you hesitant at all about seeing your characters, physically come to life on the screen?
I'm extremely excited at the concept. I really am. I'm excited to see what's in store. I love the vision that the creative team has for this book. It's something that as I wrote it, I could sort of, in my mind, I could see how it would play out, as something that could be on a screen. But of course, you never really know if anything like that is going to happen. So I'm interested to see what comes of it. But I love the idea of being able to extend these characters, kind of beyond the page.
Yeah, and I love when I read the news a couple of weeks ago, I was excited to see that it was going to be a series and not just a film, if we can say just a film. But that's really where the real innovation is happening these days. Seems like is in TV series, you can really do so much more with the characters, and you can really slow the story down. So I was excited to see that. That's going to be great.
I was too. And, I hadn't necessarily thought of a series, but as soon as people started talking about it, it made complete sense to me for this book because of how many characters there are and because of the individual storylines. And you could, very easily focus on different characters and different episodes and really kind of get to know them and their stories over a kind of a capsule season. So I think it's exactly the right format for this book.
Yeah, sure. In writing this book, which is a mystery kind of at its core, as opposed to some of the other genres that you've written in the past, are there any specific challenges to writing in this genre? Do you have to approach the writing differently, or maybe the planning to write? Does it differ in the creative process from writing fantasy or dystopian or any of the others?
Yeah, it definitely did. I found that I used to be, what's called a pantser, somebody who would just sort of sit down and write by the seat of their pants and see where it goes. And for this book, I couldn't do that. It was too complicated, and there were too many things that needed to be built in early on. Clues that had to be hidden, red herrings that had to be planted, character reveals that had to happen at, kind of just the right point. So this was really the first time I had ever outlined in really great detail the entire book before I got very far in the writing process. And then, of course, things do change when you write. You go in directions that you don't expect. Characters take you places you did not maybe intend for them to go. So you have to go back and correct for that, even more so with a mystery, because if somebody's, off doing something you didn't plan, that might have a domino effect on what you did have planned. So you almost have to have this extra column in your spreadsheet of, these are all the mystery elements that need to occur beyond what's happening with the plot and beyond what's happening with the character. And, I have to make sure all this works in. And even when we started revising, my editor had fantastic suggestions for revision, and I was completely on board with them. But you have that moment of panic where you think, if I take this piece out, it's all going to crumble.
Right.
Now what do I do? And you figure it out. But there's definitely a whole other layer when you've got that mystery side of things that you need to maintain.
Yeah, for sure. When you have a book that is a breakout success, like One of Us is Lying is, what is the pressure like to follow that up with a sophomore, release?
Oh, no pressure at all.
I would think not.
It's one of those things where I think I think Lin-Manuel Miranda is somebody I often look to when I think about this. And people asked him how he was going to follow up on Hamilton, and not that I'm comparing myself to Hamilton, but I liked his advice, where he just said, you can't think about that as a creative person, or you would never do anything ever again.
Yes.
And so that's kind of how I look at it. I feel like this was such a wonderful experience. I'm thrilled that people are connecting with this book. I'm excited about my next book. And I hope that it finds an audience that loves it. If it's not to this degree, that's okay. This has been a fantastic experience.
And I was really hoping that was the answer that you were going to give, because every book deserves to be its own entity. And, as writers, of course we all want to be successful. Of course we want to see our names on the bestseller list and all of that stuff. But where, I know for me as a writer and for so many others that I've talked to, the real payday is when you get those letters from readers that said, this really touched me. This really communicated with me on a very deep level. And, when they say thank you for writing it, that's, you take those things to the bank.
Absolutely. That is the greatest feeling. And I've gotten many such letters for One of Us is Lying. And what's great is that people identify and care about different things, different parts of the book that speak to them that maybe others don't notice as much. So it really is so much about that individual reader's experience and what they take away. And it's the best feeling as a writer to know that you've touched somebody.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask you when I was reading, because you do have these characters that are very specific and they all relate to someone we know or some group of people that we know. What is the challenge in writing, these things that are very common to us, these people that are very common, without being cliche?
Yeah, that's a challenge. And I think, it's interesting. Every once in a while, I'll hear from readers who say, well, I didn't really like the beginning because everyone felt so cliche, but then, they do evolve and change over time. And I think it's that delicate balance of trying to create something that's familiar and something that makes sense, but not resting on that and taking it to a different point and surprising people a little bit. And even if sometimes your characters stay a bit cliche or a bit stereotypical, sometimes things are stereotypes because they're true, because there's a lot of truth to that experience, and that's something that people can relate to. So, you do try and flesh your characters out as much as possible and make them feel real, while also maybe being okay with the fact that sometimes you're a little bit tropey because tropes are meaningful.
Right. And we talk about that a lot with fantasy writers, is that, you never want to be derivative, yet everyone comes to the page with the same toolkit. Especially if you're writing fantasy, the tropes are so over the top tropey. We've got elves, we've got orcs, we've got magicians, wizards, yet we all take these same tools in the toolkit and create something vastly different. And we somehow find ways to tell new and engaging stories with the same stupid tropes over and over again.
Right. Yeah, there's only so many stories in the world, right? But somehow we keep finding fresh spins on it.
Exactly. Well, One of Us is Lying is definitely a fresh spin on some very common and comfortable, genre and tropes, yet it is a magnificent work. I've really enjoyed reading it. Karen, if people want to follow you and, see what the latest news with One of Us is Lying is and this, spectacular second book that you're going to write, where can they follow you?
So, my primary platform, social media wise, where I share a lot of news and information, is Twitter, and I'm at writer KMC there. I use the same handle on Instagram. And my website is KarenMcManus.com.
Excellent. Karen, thank you so much for writing this book and for taking time to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories Podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Tune in for new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
What in the name of Carl Sagan was he doing in the cemetery on Halloween? What was he thinking? He whirled, expecting the Headless Horseman himself to be waiting on the road ahead. Or was he lurking behind? He wanted to run, but now the bridge ahead worried him. Doesn't the horseman haunt bridges? Could he avoid crossing it somehow? It terrified him. Why? It was just a stupid bridge. The gloom beneath could have been the lair of a troll. Billy Goat's Gruff. Mama used to read that. The troll waits beneath for the fattest, sweetest goat. Jason thought he saw something on the far end of the bridge, a shape of some sort. He stepped onto the bridge and gripped the knotty railing. He felt the ground drop away beneath as he edged forward. His eyes remained on the shape. It's nothing. It's nothing. Is it nothing? No troll attacked him as he reached the other shore. The looming shape was only a stupid stairwell opposite the bridge that climbed up the hill and into the main cemetery. He turned left and ran, admitting defeat and letting the fear take him over. He ran southward down the long, dark road. His initial burst of adrenaline ran its course, and he slowed, then walked again, limping a little. Headstones slipped past on the right. He still had enough light that he caught his reflection occasionally in the polished stone. He looked very young and very thin. He could feel his vulnerability as he walked along. He grew aware of his own body, the touch of his starchy dress shirt and his jacket and the soft weight of his backpack. He saw himself reflected in the headstones, just a container of warm fluids, flimsy work for a blade or a hoof or a sword. He felt shatterable and transient, and his next breath was not guaranteed, oh no. The leaves made a faint oceanic rustle all around. The insects sang their three-note songs. Jason Crane, Jason Crane, Jason Crane. Jason sang a wretched pop song as he walked. Something about having no self-control and no bitches and not enough money. He sang it softly, absent-mindedly, as if reciting a psalm. He passed Reese, Finnerton, Bain, Ekdal, Forest, Black, Small. There. He saw the gate at the end of the road. But the gate would be locked, he remembered. He would have to climb the embankment and cross over the churchyard. He could see the spire of the church above and the weather vane spinning against the sky. He would rather climb this gate than face that churchyard, but the spikes on top made leaping the fence impossible. Okay, just be quick. Something caught his ear, a brittle, clipping sound. He scanned the crest above and saw a horse silhouetted among the graves. It looked to be tied to a branch of the locust tree. He had heard its hooves as it shifted from foot to foot. It rustled somehow. His breath caught. He forced himself to be calm and rational. Some Halloween thing, maybe, for some event. He found the stairs and ascended, sideways, ready to bolt if necessary. He watched the horse, but when he neared the top he saw the rider, standing upon the shallow depression of the horseman's grave. The figure was motionless, a dim shape that absorbed light and gave nothing back. He could make out the shape of the boots and the legs and two arms held away from the body, palms down. Just a man? But the cape of the thing was not normal. It contorted painfully, twisting in the air even though the wind wasn't blowing. It wrung itself and billowed and whipped slowly, as if the figure wore a wave torn from a black ocean. And above its shoulders, is he headless? Is he headless?